Welcome to the Imperial Truth. I'm your host, Eric, and today we're going to begin our Forging a Narrative series. So, we're going to start with the very basics and just discuss what narrative gaming even is, at least in my mind. Please understand that a lot of this stuff is subjective, that your version of this may not be the same as mine. And if it isn't, leave a comment and let me know what you think. I'm curious to see what people, you know, come up with this stuff, or what your thoughts are. And if you enjoy this sort of content, once again, subscribe, share this channel with somebody that will like it, leave a comment, like it, do all the things, appease the machine god, and hopefully we'll get enough traction to kind of like continue to justify the time that we got to put into these. So with that said, let's talk about this. Let's talk about what narrative gaming is, and then in the future we'll come back and talk about how to build narrative lists, or how to write your own stories, or how to build narrative scenarios, narrative rules into our games, and then we'll kind of end this series at some point in the future, building our own campaign, our own narrative campaign together, and from the ground up. And then I'll probably use it in my local store to run. But so let's get in here. So when we are talking about narrative versus competitive, we have to understand that right away we are triggering some people. I just put some words that I associate with these things kind of on the slide, but you might feel differently. So when I think about narrative, the words that come to mind, not necessarily my feelings about it, are things like fluffy, themed, soft, casual, right? And on the other side, on the competitive side, which is often the way that this is sort of structured, competitive is cutthroat, or win at all costs, or hardcore, or try hard. And I want to be really clear, I don't think that either of those things are either mutually exclusive or necessarily good or bad innately. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's put forward a hypothetical narrative list. Now, I'm not an Astartes player. I don't play Space Marines in Horus Heresy. And so I'm just going to throw out some units that I think would make a good list. I have no idea how big of a list this would be, but let's make a Sons of Horus themed spearhead um, detachment. So the idea here is that we're emulating the Sons of Horus idea that they have this spearhead assault, and they go in and they strike off the head of their enemy, and that's how they win their battles. And for the Luna Wolves, if you've read the stories, this is how they fought. This was their like primary thing, was going in and chopping off the head. So in my list, I would have some of the Terminator headquarters units, probably some both Cataphracti and Tartarus, because both of those have their own sort of benefits. Obviously, we put in a lot of Terminator units because we're going to make this a first company force. We put in maybe a unit of Justaran Terminators. They're pretty expensive. Probably we park them in a Spartan and then toss in some Land Raiders so that the rest of our Terminators can get across the board. This is a really narrative list, right? Like objectively, this fits right in with a theme of the Sons of Horus. It fits right in with the first company. It's gonna look good because we're gonna have black Terminators with the sea green of the Sons of Horus, and on the Spartans and Land Raiders. Those things are gonna look great. Would it be a fun list to play against, though? Probably not. Um, there's not a lot in that list that's going to be easy to kill, unless you specifically told your list to counter this. You're going to have a hard time, and I am probably going to score some points with Vanguard, and your line units aren't going to stick around very long. So I would argue that this is an objectively narrative list, but it's also pretty hardcore. It's it would be pretty feels bad if you didn't know that this was what I was bringing to the table. So I think we need to reframe the discussion. And a lot of the times when we have arguments just in life, this is a great way to kind of deal with the conflict, is to reframe it. What is actually being said here? So I don't think it's narrative versus competitive, because I don't think narrative and competitive are mutually exclusive. I think we need to take a step back even further and ask, why are we even doing this? Why are we wargaming? What is the purpose of this hobby? And I'm going to put up some ideas. And again, we'll talk about sort of the overall with ideas with this in a minute. So this hobby is a significant game time investment. It's a huge time sink. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I like it, right? Between reading the books and assembling miniatures and painting miniatures and playing games, you've got hours and hours and hours. Even before that first game, you've got probably dozens of hours in the hobby just in general. And that means that we need to be sort of aware of the fact that people are coming to the table already invested big time into the hobby. And we have to also understand that there are pretty diverse expectations for this hobby. And I don't want to gatekeep the hobby. I don't want to invalidate anybody's preferences. Okay. My oldest son, who's 2022, losing track of time, 2022, they really enjoy this hobby, but their sort of like perfect battle, if you will, is to assemble a whole bunch of beautifully painted models and put them on a table with beautifully painted terrain and take some pictures. And that's about it. Whether or not they roll dice, whether or not they win or lose or play the game, even that doesn't matter. For them, it's just taking the pictures. And so I want you to keep this in mind as we move forward. How would you feel if you set up a game and you drove to the hobby store or wherever you're going to play and you set up the terrain and the board looked really nice and your opponent brought really beautiful models and set everything up and they took pictures, and then before any dice were rolled, they started putting everything away because that was done. They got their joy out of it. They enjoyed that experience, and you're like, I didn't get to enjoy this at all. I just barely got started, right? You would be pretty upset, right? You'd be offended by that, and probably disappointed. So let's just keep in mind that everybody's got different expectations, and we need to communicate those expectations as we move forward. We should also try to avoid negative experiences, and we should try to maximize positive experiences. And this is sort of a weird idea that I mean, my gaming group I feel like is pretty decent. It's pretty good people. I don't know that everybody thinks about this. And that's okay. That's okay. We're all in different spots, and we're honestly we're all kind of nerds here, right? And we're all a little socially awkward. So that's fine. Just be aware of it, right? So I think instead that we should frame this discussion as collaborative versus adversarial. And don't get offended because adversarial isn't bad. Adversarial is the goal is winning. The game is a competition, right? If we think about like the NBA or the NFL, right? Like professional sports, those are adversarial games. Your goal is to win, and that is the only goal. You can do whatever you want within the rules of the game to try to win, but ultimately your goal is winning, right? That's different than a collaborative game. So if we think about something like, a role-playing game, the goal there is usually the mutual enjoyment of everybody at the table. The game is a collaboration. The game is all about, did you have a good time? Oh, I had a good time. Did you not have a good time? Okay, well, how can we make it a good time for you next time, right? That's a very different thing than, competitive versus narrative, right? In this case, there you could have a game where the goal is winning and it's a competition and that's the point, and you could have a game where the goal is everybody getting together and having a good time and having some laughs, and that is also a valid thing. Neither of those are should be excluded or gate kept. So if we take a step back and think about the origins of like the Warhammer games, Rogue Trader was published in 1987, and was essentially Warhammer 40,000 First Edition, although you wouldn't have recognized it as a game, like a tabletop game, in as much because it was more collaborative storytelling. So they had a game master. The game master's job was to maintain balance and keep the scenarios going, and sometimes pilot third-party fighters in the game. The game focused on the story. The story was the point. And the objective of the game was to create these dynamic narrative battles that engaged everyone. They weren't fair or balanced, not at all. In some cases, they're not fair and balanced at all. Sometimes they're not even winnable for one of the players, which seems counterintuitive, but the experience was the objective here. So it was, hey, we had this crazy battle, and yeah, my guys were going to die all along, but I wanted to see how many of them I could take with me, right? That's the sort of idea that I want us to kind of consider today. If we come at this from historical war games, so my background is historical war games. I grew up, that was the first thing I played, and then started playing 40K in second edition, and going to places like Historicon, with the Historical Miniatures Gaming Society, and Fall In, and Cold Wars and all of those things. So if you're from the East Coast of the United States, you probably know what I'm talking about. If you're not, you probably have no idea. But these were, you'd walk around, there'd be these huge set piece battles where people brought their beautifully painted models and put them on really elaborate tables. And sometimes for some of the games, that was most of it. I don't remember his name, and I'm really sad that I don't remember his name. But there's this gentleman who he would create these gigantic battles that would be 30, 40 feet long, and have thousands of miniatures and beautiful terrain, and he would run it a few times through the week, and you could come up and play, and but it was really, you were more like an extra in the story than anything else. But the point was the spectacle, right? Just walking up and be like, "Holy crap, this is insane!" And that's how he engaged with the hobby. And so there are these other aspects that we can pull from, and it's worth noting that in historical games, the idea of being competitive is a relatively new thing. Flames of War, bold action games like that are looked at as like sort of pickup games, or competitive games or tournament games. There were some of those. The ones that I know of were like DBA, so Debilis Antiquitatem, I think, and Debilis Multitudinum is the other one. Those were basically like small scale skirmish games where you were like, you had your army and everything was set, and they were tournaments, and there were rules about like how many times your dice had to bounce before it stopped in order for it to be safe, or considered illegal. And so those games did exist, but I would say that if you went to Historicon in the 90s, the vast majority of the games there were not considered to be like competitive. They were literally just people who liked those time periods, or like those miniatures, or like those whatever, who got together and just had a good time and just had fun with each other. And so more often than not, sorry, I kind of got ahead of myself. These games were set piece battles or recreations, right? So sometimes we will focus on historical accuracy rather than balance or competition, right? So if we do something like the Battle of Gettysburg, it's not balanced. It's not a fair fight, right? And it's not supposed to be. It's supposed to be an accurate fight. And we're going to bring on certain units exactly when they would have. And maybe we have some sort of turn timer that gives us the time in the day, so that we know when certain groups are coming on or leaving the battlefield, right? Those things could be part of this. Sometimes we had specialized rules or even bespoke rules. So you might write a rule set just for one game to represent a specific scale of battle or a specific conflict. I remember watching one from that was basically the Black Hawk Down a story. And so it was in Mogadishu, and the table looked great. And it was, they had the different factions coming on the board edges as the Americans were trying to extricate themselves. It was just a crazy battle. There was no way that it was going to go well for one of those sides, but they played it anyway because it was fun. The goal of these of these battles is the experience, the spectacle, the camaraderie. When I would run games, I used to joke about these things that I termed as, and I apologize if this is too crude for people, but I term them as game gasms, where like somebody would roll a very key dice roll and do super well, and everybody at the table on both sides would yell and scream and get really excited. And I thought that those are really fun moments, that it's not about, I'm not upset that you rolled that incredible roll and destroyed my unit. That was amazing. That was incredible. That's why we're here, is to have fun and get caught up in the moment. And so I think with the Horus Heresy, we have a unique situation that is somewhat different than the 40K universe because, in a way, Horus Heresy is historical science fiction, right? In Warhammer 40,000, things are happening. The story is still unraveling and things are unfolding. But in Horus Heresy, we know what happens. We know who won. We know what battles happened. We know that Tarvitz, for example, wasn't at the Siege of Terra, spoilers, or that Lorgar didn't participate in the battles at Beta Garmin, right? Like, we know those things didn't happen. And so we can kind of use the history, use the story to allow us to tell stories in our battles. We get some retcons. We're getting a new book about the Isfan battles, which will probably have some new information. Saturnine Terminators are, much to my chagrin, new, right? They don't appear anywhere in the books, but suddenly they're part of the setting. And that's fine. Like, that's okay. If you play a World War II war game, one of the things that sometimes happens in those games is people will bring experimental weapons or weapons that didn't exist. I remember there was one of the French char variants, maybe a char D or char E, that there were like just a handful of them ever made, and none of them ever saw the battlefield. But they made models for them, and you could buy one and you could paint it, and you could, some rule sets had rules for them. So if you wanted to have a hypothetical battle, you could do that. And so we can incorporate things like our Saturnine Terminators and just, you know kind of hand wave a little bit and still include them in our storylines. But I think the Horus Heresy gives us an opportunity to relive our favorite moments in the narrative. So, is there a battle that you really enjoyed hearing about? Was there something that you thought was super epic? Or we can tell our own story within our setting. So, maybe you have, a group of loyalist Emperor's children that never they were on their own, crusade fleet and weren't really part of the main group when they felt chaos, and they just weren't aware of it, and then they kind of encountered groups and they were like, holy crap, this is not, we're the Emperor's children. Why are they falling, rebelling against the Emperor? We're gonna, side with the Emperor. And you can tell that story, and that's completely legitimate and fine. But it allows us this opportunity to really play almost a historical game in this science fiction setting. And I think personally that that's really cool. I think that that's a really neat aspect of the hobby that is difficult to have in other things. We've got what, like 100 books from the Horus Heresy series, and the Siege of Terra that outline these stories. So you can pull anything, and that's so cool. That's so neat. We also have this problem, and this is a society problem, I think, and we can refer to it as hookup culture in our games, but basically I'm referring to pickup games, and tournaments do this a little bit more, but it's this idea that the expectations are so easily in conflict. Like when you and I sit down, when we do a pickup game, and if we don't have a serious conversation about what we want out of that game, there is a very real chance that we are going to end up uh, uh, misunderstanding what the other person wants. And in a tournament, that can be even more intense because there is, you're like randomly assigned to somebody. And unless you understand what that person wants, you're probably going to miss it, right? I went to a narrative tournament earlier this year, so earlier in 2025, and I was happy to be there. I appreciate that the tournament organizers put it on, but it was not a narrative tournament from my perspective. It was a competitive tournament, or if we're going to use the right words, right, it wasn't a collaborative tournament. It was an adversarial tournament where there were definite winners and definite losers, and the winners of the entire event got prizes. And um, that was the point. And they just had slightly different or more varied scenarios. That's what it was. There was no real emphasis on telling a story, on telling a narrative, on people working together, right? Maybe in a narrative tournament, a true narrative tournament, you might choose to lose. You might be like, okay, well, I'm gonna opt to lose my battle, or take some of my units and put them on another table, so that knowing that I'm going to lose so that they can win, right? That's the sort of idea that you have with a collaboration, where there's things happening. And when we don't really have a clear culture of collaboration in the game, right? We focus a lot on don't be a dick, right? And be nice to your opponent and shake their hands and say good game and don't rage or anything. And I do rage sometimes. I admit I sometimes lose it. But like that should not that should not be the case. We should focus on, I think we should focus on the collaboration. And we also have this problem in our sort of hookup culture gaming approach, in that balanced games are good, or that balanced points mean a balanced game. I think we really need to disabuse ourselves of those ideas. I don't think a balanced game makes a good game. I don't think points mean that we're balanced. We should not assume that just because you had a good time, that your opponent had a good time. And if we're coming at this from this culture of collaboration, your goal should be that your opponent also has a good time. That should be part of the expectation. And again, I'm not keeping this, I'm not pushing this on everyone. If you hear this and you're like, this does not resonate with me at all, that's fine. It doesn't have to. Maybe you really enjoy the adversarial, the competitive side of things, and that is totally fine. I understand that that scratches the itch for some people. I'm just trying to explain from my perspective of what this is, and again, like, share your experiences in the comments. Let's have a conversation down there about it. I'm happy to. I played a game a number of years ago called War Machine. You might be familiar with it. And I will say this, I really enjoyed War Machine. I think it's War Machine Second Edition is probably the best war game I've ever played. And that's saying something. It was really good. But they had this idea in it, and this is the first of the page fives, and it was this page five mentality. And if you read through this with any sort of like objective middle school level of reading, you realize that this is tongue in cheek, that this is a little satire, that they're kind of over the top coming at this to try to like get people really excited about the game. But people internalize this, and this became sort of the mentality in the game, that it was like you should not complain about things being unbalanced, just like literally grow a pair, which is, in hindsight in the 24 to 25s, is a pretty misogynistic statement. Unless they're referring to ovaries, then I'm all for it. But like, it, we need to understand that winning isn't necessarily the goal. At least in my mind, winning the game is not the goal. You can win the game and lose the battle, if that makes sense. If you win a game and your opponent never wants to play against you again, you've lost. You've lost. When I played Age of Sigmar, we had a player, and God love him, he was a pretty nice guy, but he just always played the most over the top net list tournament style game things all the time. He was always prepping for tournaments. And it got to the point where people refused to play against him because it just wasn't fun. And uh, he lost, right? Like, he might have won his game. He maybe had a perfect streak of winning. But if nobody will play with you, did you win? Right. And so I think that personally, community, friendship, collaboration, those things, that's what we're going for, right? We're building a community. We want to make friends. We want to collaborate with one another. That should be the goal. And when you're playing a game, I think that you shouldn't be afraid to take your foot off the gas, right? So if you're really clobbering your opponent and you have units in deep strike, maybe just don't bring them on, right? Give your opponent a chance. Or like, if there's a charge or a flank that you're going to crush them on, and it's going to turn the game, and they're going to have no way of ever coming back from that, just don't do that thing, right? And you're like, well, are you saying that I should throw softballs at my opponent? Yeah, I think you should. I think if you're sensing that they're not having a good time, then you need to figure out a way for them to have a good time. And I think that we shouldn't be afraid to improvise. If we think about like the Battle of Helm's Deep from the Two Towers books, um, think about that battle, right? Like the Rohirrim, they're up against it. They're trapped in Helm's Deep. They're not winning. They're gonna lose. They're overwhelmed. The numbers are just not in their favor. And so what happens? Well, we get a huge group of reinforcements from the flank. Wow, we didn't expect that. That's going to change the battle. And we're going to sally forth from the gate and overwhelm them and break the enemy, right? So in that case, we have, some things that happened unexpectedly to turn the tide. So don't be afraid to do that. Don't be afraid to be like, oh well, I'm losing this battle really badly, and my lines are being overrun, and I'm playing Solar Auxilia, and my Space Marine opponents are going to take my lines, and I'm going to lose. Maybe we come up with a rule that if I do this thing, I call down artillery fire on my position, and I will lose all my guys, but you will lose your guys too. And losing a few hundred Solar Auxilia is nothing compared to losing a few dozen Space Marines, right? So try to come up with ways that the game can be dynamic and play with it, right? Like try something and be like, hey, did you like that? And if they're like, nope, then you don't do it again. And get feedback and stuff like that. If you're up against the wall, right? Maybe there's some new objective. Maybe we're losing the battle, but like this one objective becomes really important and the other two aren't as important. Or maybe my goal suddenly isn't to stop the enemy or win the battle. Maybe my goal is to get as many guys off the board as possible. Or maybe, I mean, we think about that in the I'm trying to think of the first spaceport battle in the Siege of Terra books where they're losing, and it's the one where Kroger, the Iron Warriors guy, is going up against Dorn, or not Dorn. I forget who they're going up against. Fafnir Rand, I think, is maybe the overall commander. Anyway, in that battle, at the end, the loyalists are just trying to get their guys across the spaceport bridges and save as much of their strength as possible. Maybe that becomes your new objective. If we think about Saturnine in the book Saturnine, which is a Solar War book, in that again the spaceport battle, and again I'm sorry I'm not remembering the spaceport battle, where like Shivan Khan is, they're not supposed to win. That's not their goal. Their goal is just to die and take as many of the enemy with them as possible, because there are things happening elsewhere that are way more important. They know they're going to lose, and so maybe we can come up with scenarios and ideas where losing is not the end of the battle, right? It's not that, it doesn't mean that you are defeated. And I mean, at the very least, just make Slay the Warlord more points, right? Be like, okay, well, I'm losing, so I'm gonna try and take your warlord with me. And instead of being worth 3 points or 4 points in this battle, let's make it worth 8 points or 12 points or something, right? Like make it equitable for your opponent so that they have a chance, so that they have that goal to work for, and can maybe win, or at least have a chance to engage with the game, right? Because there's nothing worse than sitting down at a table, looking at what your opponent brought, looking at the scenario and realizing you're going to lose no matter what, no matter how good your dice are, no matter how bad their dice are, you will lose this battle, and there's nothing you can do. And you're just going to have to sit there and watch them play with their miniatures for 2 hours. Nobody wants that, right? Like nobody wants to be in that situation. So let's just be mindful of that. That can be our new page 5. It's like to help your opponents have a good time. And let's even take a step back from that and think about what even makes a good narrative. Why do we read books and watch movies? What are the epic moments that stick out to us? What made those moments memorable? If we think about something like um, I'm trying to think of some historical war battles that are jumping out. Oh, like in the movie Fury, right? So Fury is a fictional tale, um, but at the end of the movie, spoilers, they're holding a crossroads. They're gonna lose. They know that they're gonna lose. Their goal is to slow the enemy down and inflict as many casualties as possible, and that's it. That's their goal. That's pretty heroic, right? Like that's a pretty badass ending in our story, and that's not a win. They die, right? Like that story ends with them almost all dying. Um, what makes something heroic? Well, oftentimes making something heroic is not necessarily, some pitched battle where everything is fair and everything's balanced, and it's the conflict, it's the strife, it's the sense of inevitability and standing up against that inevitability that makes those things exciting and dynamic and memorable. So why aren't we building our war games around that? Why are we focusing on, balanced, mirrored placement of L-shaped ruins and fighting over, open ground because there's an objective marker there, and oh, I don't want to put my line unit right on this objective because I need to be able to move off the objective when your vanguard unit comes in because I don't want to give you vanguard points, right? Like if you're into that sort of techie side of the game, that's fine. I'm not criticizing the way that you play at all, but that to me is not a good story, right? That doesn't tell a good story. And I think that we really could do better in terms of that. And so consider like our historical battles. Go back to that. Why do we remember the Battle of the Bulge? Why is that a memorable battle? Why do we remember Stalingrad? I know I'm pulling a lot of World War II stuff, but that was the historical time period that I was really into. um why do we celebrate these things? Why do we debate a certain battle? I see a lot of people that do sort of Civil War games. They try and win it from the other side and try and turn the tide of the battle, and what did the general do wrong, or what could they have done better to win this battle, right? Like those are things that we could imagine. Like can we sort of dissect some battles from the Horus Heresy books and be like, okay, well, let's try to recreate sort of terrain and forces that represent this battle, and let's fight it out and let's see what happens. And maybe we try and win when our side lost, or whatnot. Just consider that stuff as we're sort of moving forward and trying to build this stuff and trying to create these narratives. I think that that's a really good way to come along around with this stuff. So let's go back to my Sons of Horus, Speartip Assault Force, right? So that Terminator list, that was all Terminators and all Spartans and all Land Raiders, that is super accurate to the fiction, but that is really tough to fight against. A lot of T5 models with Vanguard, a lot of multi-wound models, a lot of 2+ saves, a lot of AV-14 vehicles. We will talk. We're going to do in the, I think it's called the Science of Slaughter series, where we talk about the mathematics of the game. We're going to talk about Armor 14 vehicles and why they're a problem, because guys, they're a problem. But for now, we can all acknowledge that that would be a really tough list to play against. You can't put your units on objectives, because if you put your units on objectives, they're going to score Vanguard points against you every single time you do. But you need to put your units on objectives to win. And so this list it's gonna beat the crap out of most people, but it's incredibly fluffy. It's incredibly narrative. And if I spent hours and hours and hours and hours painting and modeling, carefully converting things, I would want to play with my models, right? And so let's talk about it. Well, let's grab the first wave mission, which is the only narrative mission we had up until this last book that came out. So this represents the loyalists versus the traitors on Isfahan. It's an asymmetric scenario. I've played it twice. I've been on both sides of this. It is overall a pretty good scenario. I actually really like it. I think that it could be tweaked a little bit. And I think that certain armies become a little bit problematic in it, which is unfortunate. But it could be good, right? Like it could be a good scenario. It's got all the components. But in this scenario, the traitors are the defenders. So if I'm playing Sons of Horus, I'm a defender, and the traitors are on kill points, and the loyalists are trying to control objectives. So the loyalists are going to want to bring a lot of line units and park them on objectives to score points. And what did the Sons of Horus Speartip units do? They crush units that are on objectives. They absolutely demolish them. And worse, they score lots of points for it. So you score 2 points, I think, for every unit you kill, which means Justair Terminators, if they kill a unit on an objective, they score 6 points for one unit killed. That is, I would wager to say that if I brought this narrative Terminator Speartip a list and played against and first wave against pretty much anybody with any list build, I'm going to crush them. Absolutely crush them in points, because you're not going to get first strike against me. You're not going to probably get Slay the Warlord against me. And you're not going to get last man standing. So right there out of the gate is what, like 10 points. And then every single time I kill one of your units on an objective, I'm going to score between 4 to 6 points, which is nuts. It would not be a fun playing experience. This would, even though I'm bringing a narrative list to a narrative game, this is not the way to go. And so I would propose that if we have a list like this that is not particularly balanced, but is very narrative, maybe we could come up with a different way to approach this, right? Why are my Sons of Horus Speartip Assault being deployed, right? Like, why would we deploy them? Well, usually they're deployed to chop off the head of the enemy army. Okay, well, let's create a scenario that engages both players around that idea. Maybe the attacker's objective is just to kill the opposing warlord and their retinue. Maybe we give the opposing warlord and their retinue extra wounds or special rules that allow them to be a little bit more durable, right? Maybe for a defender objective, they just have to survive. They just have to not die by turn 4, or maybe they have to move from one side of the board to the other to represent sort of moving with a convoy or retreating away from this terrible assault by these Astartes. For deployment, maybe we have the defender deploy sort of spread out all across the board so that they can't like just build their whole army around one spot, although that might not be horrible. And then maybe we have some sort of special rule that the attacker can't deep strike, even though all these Terminators can deep strike. Maybe in this case, they can't, just to represent the defending army, being attacked. And maybe the defending army gets reinforcements if things go really badly, to represent sort of like my armies, the Sons of Horus are attacking. They're trying to get to our commander, and my whole army sort of collapses onto my location so that I can protect myself from the Sons of Horus. In third edition, Horus Heresy, I think the rules are overall pretty decent. I think that there are a lot of aspects of the rules that are solid and have some depth to them, which is really good in a game. I think that Vanguard and Line don't lend themselves very well towards narrative games, towards this sort of collaborative storytelling, because we need static objective markers and progressive scoring to happen to make them worthwhile, and they are pointed in that area. They're balanced in that because of those points, and so like maybe we need to rethink that in the future, and in a future video to kind of discuss why these or how these units can interact with things. I think that the sequential objectives is really tough to balance. Again, like if I'm standing on this objective for 1 turn or 2 turns or 3 turns, how am I getting points for it? I think there are ways we can work around that. And again, in the future, we'll talk about a scenario. We'll build a scenario together and try and come up with that. But I think that we need to really be aware of that sequential scoring is an aspect of adversarial games, right? Like that's the way we do competitive games or pickup games. And we don't necessarily want to even have that in a narrative game. The terrain rules are just bad. Like there's no way. We need better terrain rules, and I'm hoping that the community will come up with them. But we will also try to come up with some as we move forward, and try and come up with some terrain that's dynamic and interactive. If you played Age of Sigmar at one point, I think maybe second edition Age of Sigmar. I think second edition Age of Sigmar had each terrain type has its own sort of rule, which was kind of fun. So like you had, the Watchtower had a special rule associated with it. There was this throne, the Majorath throne had special rules associated with it. And if you put those things on the board, then you got those special rules. And I think that would be good. Like I have a watchtower, or the old Aegis defense line has like a little autocannon, quad autocannon turret. Like maybe that's a turret like the tarantulas that just fires at anything that's nearby. I think that would be fun. I think that those would be cool, and would give us a little bit more interactiveness with the terrain rules. I think vehicle rules need reworked. I don't know how to rework them. I don't like the way the vehicle rules work. And again, we'll talk about that in the Signs of Slaughter series. I don't know, maybe the next one we do, but definitely in the coming weeks. AV14 vehicles are just rough, and they're not good, and they're not interactive at all. It's bad that you can bring vehicles that I look at and I'm just like, I'm not going to shoot that at all ever this game, because there's literally no reason for me to shoot that vehicle. That's not the way you write a good game. So we'll talk about some house rules in the future and see what we can figure out. But in summary, and I thank you for sticking along around this long, if you have. I think that narrative gaming should be collaborative. I think our goal should be the experience, the spectacle, everybody enjoying themselves, sort of walking away being, holy crap, I can't believe that happened, right? Like those should be the moments that we think about it, not like, oh my God, I really crushed that guy. I think that everything begins with a conversation. What are you looking for? What type of list are you going to run? What type of game do you want to create? Like I have a friend here who, when we play, we usually send each other our lists and we talk about it. We're like, oh, you're bringing this? Okay, well, I'm going to switch this out so that I can have an answer for that. And it's unfortunately right now the Mechanicum to the Solar Auxilia combo is not a great feel for the Solar Aux players. But we have had conversations about that in the past and trying to like make sure that everybody gets what they want out of the game. I think that's good. I think that you should do that. And if you have the opportunity to message text your person that you're going to play with, and just be like, hey, listen, I would like to bring this list. I know maybe this is not a good list for you. How can we make this fair? How can we make this fun for you? What could we do to make this be an engaging game? And again, do not be afraid to house rule and experiment. Sit down with your opponent, talk about things, be like, hey, listen, I don't like this scenario. I think that this scenario is bad. One of the ones in the core book that I think would be an easy fix for is there's one where there are two objectives, and when you score the objective, they go down a point until they reach zero, and I think they get removed at that point. And I think that if you didn't remove the objective and it just went to zero, that would be interesting, because now Vanguard and line are still important. In fact, line at the end of that game is really important, because if the objective is worth 0, but I have a line 2 unit, I can still score 2 points, right? That things like that. Just start playing with it. Just see what you can figure out. It is a game, guys, and it should be fun. And so if you sit down for scenarios, sit down for a game, and it's not fun, deconstruct it, talk about it. This wasn't a good. I didn't enjoy facing 4 land raiders in your list. Could we maybe figure something out about that in the future? Maybe we reintroduce glancing hits doing something other than, or sorry, penetrating hits doing something other than just the damage. Maybe there is a chance that you just freaking blow up a vehicle if you hit it with something. Maybe we alter the armor bane rule so that armor bane guns are actually do something. I don't know. I don't know what all the answers are, and I'd be curious if you want to share things in the comments. But do experiment, and if you experiment, if you try this stuff and you're like, wow, this is really great, let me know. Let me know what you think, and I hope that we've had a good conversation, and I've challenged you a little bit and pushed you towards this idea of there are other ways to play other than pick up games and tournaments, and this should be fun. It should be a fun hobby. We put lots of hours into it, and we should all walk away from every single game feeling like, wow, that was really fun. Even if you get your butt kicked, wow, that was really crazy. I can't believe that happened in that game, right? And I know that in second edition, sorry, I will stop in a minute. I know in second edition with my Mechanicum for a long time, my goal was just to kill a unit of Astartes. It was really rough for a while. So if I could kill a unit of Space Marines in a game, that was fun. If I could kill the opponent's warlord, that was like huge. And I lost like what, like 80% of my games in second. So it was like it wasn't bad. It just, you just had to reframe, like, what does it mean to play? What does it mean to have a game? If my if my unit of automata kill a space marine unit, like, that's huge. Who cares about automata? They can like literally just pull their brains out and rebuild their bodies and they're fine. Those space marines are dead forever, right? So ideas like that can make the game really fun. So that's it. Thanks very much for hanging in this long. And we will continue this discussion in a future video. Again, please like, share, subscribe, pray to the machine god, whatever is important to you if you enjoyed this. And yeah, we'll catch you in a future video.